2 witnesses. Shifra, incidentally, happens to mean glisten, and pua means brilliance or glitter, as an aside. Anyway, he said unto them, when ye do the office of the midwife to the Hebrew women, and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then ye shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, and did not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. And the king of Egypt called for the midwives, and said unto them, why have ye done this thing, and why have ye saved the male children alive? And the midwives said unto the Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as Egyptian women, for they are lively, and are delivered before the midwives come in unto them. Going gets tough, the tough get going, or something. Yeah, right. Therefore God dwelt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very mighty. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he gave them families. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born ye shall cast into the river, and every daughter ye shall save alive. Now we get to chapter 2, which introduces our friend Moses. Many scholars have made the remark that there's probably no other character between Adam and Christ than Moses. And we're going to see a very, very interesting guy surface here, and you might well pay all the attention you can to the role of this interesting person. Goes by the name of Moses. He's a child of a slave, becomes the son of a queen. He was born in a hut and he's raised in the palace. He inherited poverty, yet he enjoyed unlimited wealth. The leader of the armies becomes a keeper of flocks. The mightiest of warriors becomes the meekest of men. He was educated at the court, but he dwelt in the desert. He had the wisdom of Egypt and the faith of a child. He was fitted for the city, but wandered in the wilderness. He was tempted by the pleasures of sin, but endured the hardships of virtue. He was backward in his speech, yet he talked with God. He carried the rod of the shepherd, but behind it was the power of the infinite. He was a fugitive Pharaoh, but an ambassador of heaven. He was the giver of law and the forerunner of grace. He died alone in Mount Moab, yet he appears with Christ in Judea. Matthew 17. No man assisted his funeral, but God himself buries him. He's also the only person in the Scripture, apparently, in which the body was denied to Satan by none other than Michael. Jude gives us this weird hint at. Interesting guy. And if you've studied Revelation chapter 11, it's my suggestion you haven't seen the last of him yet. Chapter 2, and there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw him that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, daubed it with slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it on the flags by the river's bank. And his sister stood far off to see what would be done to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river. Her maidens walked along by the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. She had compassion on him, and said, this is one of the Hebrews' children. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go and call a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? And the Pharaoh's daughter said to her, go. And the maid went and called the child's mother, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. And the woman took the child and nursed him. And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and she became her son. And she called his name Moses, or Moshe, actually. Moshe Dayan is perhaps the name we're used to. That's the proper. And she said, because I drew him out of the water. The word Moshe is very close to the word that means to draw, Moshe, means to draw out of the water. Now, a couple of things. I want you to understand the bizarreness of this. You're hiding in your hut, and you have this child, right? And the establishment are out to get your child. And what are they going to do with him when they find him? Going to put him in a river to drown him. Would you, as a mother, take your child and hide him? Probably. Would you do it in the river? Not likely. What a strange idea for these parents to take this child, put him in a basket, what we would call a basket. The word ark appears in verse 5 5, the only place in Exodus, and it also occurs in Genesis chapter 6 and 7. The word pitch here is the Hebrew word kafar, which is translated every other place in the Bible as the word for atonement. So we're getting some clues that, hey, something strange is going on. How did the parents of Moses know what to do? We get a clue from Hebrews chapter 11. You all know the Hall of Faith, this chronicle of the great faithful in the Old Testament that the writer of the book of Hebrews uses to make his points, but sort of a summary points. But in verse 23, he makes reference to the parents of Moses. Hebrews 11, verse 23, by faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. Now we can read that and not capture the idea. What does Romans 10:17 tell us about faith? Faith cometh by hearing. One can draw the inference from the writings of Paul in Romans chapter 10 and the writings of the writer of the book of Hebrews in chapter 11, verse 23, that Moses' parents did this by faith. It isn't a blind thing, it's a following of instruction kind of thing. The inference that I draw, let me just put it that way, is that unrecorded here was instruction to the parents to do exactly what they were told. And matter of fact, that's just God's way, to do the highly unlikely. The highly unlikely. In fact, a very, very strange passage occurs in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 19, for it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise and bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. And what better example than what we're going to see that Pharaoh stuck with. Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For after that, in the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom knew not God. For it pleased God by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe. For Jews require a sign, the Greeks seek after wisdom. But we preach Christ crucified, unto the Jews a stumbling block, and unto the Gentiles foolishness. But to them who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. And here's the strange verse. Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. What a bizarre phrase, the foolishness of God. How can you, with any conception of God, speak of the foolishness of God? And interesting, the greatest chronicle of God's foolishness is sitting in our laps, the Bible. What foolishness to have the entire known world saved from a flood. I mean, that which he wants to be saved, by putting him in a boat, a barge, these 8 people. We can go through the whole Scripture, item by item by item. Every example in the Scripture where God uses some strange thing to accomplish his purpose. Not the least of which is Moses here, taking this basket to save him and put him in the river, the very place that the soldiers would be drowning the babe if they found him. And we can chronicle God's dealing with man all the way through, item after item after item. And in the interest of time, I won't try to chronicle each one. But you can go through the Scripture yourself, through these bizarre Old Testament stories, where God will have them do the most unlikely things to accomplish his purpose. We can go through the healing of Naaman, the Syrian, from leprosy by washing the muddy river 7 times and all that. Jericho, here's the stronghold of the most powerful tribe of the 7 tribes that control the land. And they're going to go and march around the wall and blow trumpets. The whole Joshua thing, Bill Cosby's done such a number on Noah. I really think he ought to do a number of Joshua's staff meeting. The spies come back with their G2, right, and the intelligence on this thing, and he develops his battle plan. They're going to march around this thing and not say a word, keep their silence, once a day for 7 days. On the 7th day, we'll march around 7 times, and then we're going to blow our horns, and they're all going to fall down. Oh, really? You can go through, you can do a Bill Cosby type routine on item after item all through the Scripture. The ultimate foolishness of God. What is the most absurd idea? That the entire universe would be saved by nailing the son of a carpenter to a couple of wooden beams, crucified on a hill in Judea some 1900 years ago. Preaching of the cross is to them that perish what? Foolishness. How interesting it is that God's foolishness is wiser than men, and God's weakness is stronger than men. But anyway, we have here an example of what would seem to us a strange mechanic that God uses to preserve this child, this 3-month-old child, for his destiny. And interestingly, what a strange coincidence it is. What a strange coincidence it is that he gets picked up by Pharaoh's daughter. As all of you know, there are no coincidences in the Scripture. Hebrews 2:10 says, by whom are all things done, and so forth. And we know from Josephus, by the way, a very interesting thing, that Pharaoh's daughter was probably Thermutis, who had no other offspring.